If there's people in the public who want to hear a miracle of health and medicine and they're in this park, you ought to come because you're going to hear stuff that's true, proven, and absolutely mind blowing. And it's a sin and a disgrace to this country that it's not out there. This is the story of ozone therapy, and it's the story of the near universal panacea that's out there today that all of us could have for just about anything, any affliction that we have. It's not just a germicidal, as you will see. My medical life since 1986. I started with ozone in 86 in Alaska with the first patient. It changed my life and I became in oxygen therapy. Oxygen consumption is the source of all life and all healing. You burn more oxygen, you'll heal. You burn more oxygen, you'll stay healthier and live long. This is my quote, with the exception of diet, nutrition, and detoxification, ozone therapy has done more for more medical conditions than everything I have ever seen in conventional medicine combined. The information here is supported by hard science and experience. Pretend I have a $100 bill in my hand. I have it in my pocket and I'll pull it out. I will give it to the first one of you who can come up and name a synthetic petrochemical pharmaceutical all by itself, but not an anti-infective, that cures a disease. I want you to think about that in light of everything. So, yes, I have it. Here's a $100 bill. If you can name a drug that cures a disease, not an antimicrobial, that's yours. You might not know it, but your own body makes ozone. Antibodies that your body makes generates ozone in your body. This was at the Scripps Institute, major medical center, published in 2003. Ozone can kill invading microorganisms and augment and moderate the inflammatory response. This was at Scripps. Ozone is 3 atoms of oxygen. That's it. We're breathing O2, but the third atom of oxygen makes it highly reactive, and it's the strongest naturally occurring oxidant. It's made, you can smell it after a lightning storm. It smells fresh. The air is cleansed by the ozone. The World Health Organization has told us that we are on the cusp of a post-antibiotic era. This is extremely serious. The CDC, the Corruption Deception Commission, says that there are 2.8 million superbug infections in this country and 35,000 deaths annually. You're going to see Cuban research and where they did ozone ahead of an insult. In this slide, animals, rats, were given ozone therapy first. Then they were injected with a lethal amount of stool contamination. Just with ozone, 60+% of the animals lived. If they were given that injection of ozone, or actually rectal ozone or intraperitoneal ozone, 24 to 72 hours. Just ozone ahead of the insult. Now people are dying in the hospital even with antibiotics. Here you see 72% to the left of that red, 72% of patients or animals lived with just an antibiotic. If you added ozone to it, over 90% lived. I'm not against current drugs. I'm not against the pharmaceutical industry. You just got to use them appropriately and maybe combine it with things like this. As good as ozone is an antimicrobial, it's also an anti-inflammatory. And you heard a lot already about inflammation. Inflammation destroys, inflammation reduces circulation, it's aging, and it destroys us. This is a slide where animals were given ozone therapy to look at the response of the production of something called TNF alpha, tumor necrosis factor alpha. E and F on the left upper is the production of this horribly inflammatory cytokine with ozone. It's reduced almost to zero. Then if you look at the far right eye, that's in response to dexamethasone. a really potent steroid, a powerful steroid. Ozone works as well as reducing the most potent. Ozone seems to work as well as the most potent, one of the most potent steroids, and it's safe. Ozone can be used for all of these conditions. Just take a look as he scrolls through. All of these conditions, ozone has been used and published and or used clinically by me, him, and hundreds of other doctors. Thousands of other doctors in over 60 countries. Circulation, autoimmune, infection, chronic disease, arthritis, you name it, fungal yeast, autism. I have had cases of autism stunningly better using oxidation therapies. For example, I had a child brought into me about 6 years old who would have destroyed my office if he wasn't physically restrained. We wrapped him up in a sheet, two parents, one at the foot, one at the head. A nurse held the arm out like this while I stuck him and I did ozone or ultraviolet blood irradiation. And he struggled and he fought. By the fourth session, he walks into my office like this. This kid, he was about 7. This kid was in a normal school a year later, 1 year behind, and his dad was extraordinarily proud. This was a horrible form of autism this kid had. So many different conditions. Yeah, my office and Howard's gets results with things like Lyme, CFIDs, chronic fatigue, chemical sensitivity, autism, even depression. Why depression? When you see the mechanism of ozone increasing oxygen, that improves all body metabolism. If you get more oxygen to the brain, you can make more neurotransmitters. And you might not need these synthetic petrochemical pharmaceuticals. How can one modality do all this? As I said, the bottom line in all healing is oxygen. But ozone has other benefits, including moderating the immune system. There's several parts of the immune system, but the immune system could be like this, or it could be like that. We want the immune system out like that. Oxygen. This is a Cuban slide. The yellow is arterial oxygen. The red is venous oxygen. With ozone therapy, arterial oxygen goes up, venous oxygen goes down, and that's the spread of oxygen consumption. Does everybody understand that? The wider that is, the more oxygen is consumed, the better you're going to be. Oxygen is the most important source of all energy. Your white blood cells will undergo a respiratory burst and consume 50 times the amount of oxygen under stress fighting an infection as they are right now. Ozone is the most powerful naturally occurring oxidant. Ozone seeks out electrons, and it especially goes after double bonds in carbon. Those are unsaturated, like unsaturated fatty acids. We're going to see that. All right, but yes, it's the lipid envelope of the viruses have these structures that are vulnerable to ozone, and ozone can hit them and break them up. Ozone reacts with these fatty acids, double bonds, and creates a whole downstream set of what's called signaling molecules. These set the immune system in action, and they tell other parts of the body what to do, and you can see they're very oxygen rich. They are oxidants in their own right. Ozone's gone instantly, but it leaves those behind. Well, there's this stupid theory out there that we're supposed to be scared of oxidants and dump antioxidants into us. And that's an old theory that goes back 30 years that is quite discredited. Our bodies are awash in oxidants. Our immune cells make ozone, hydrogen peroxide, and a form of bleach called hypochlorous acid, and others. And these are what our immune cells shoot at the invaders to kill them. These are in balance, and if you don't have them, you're going to die. You also don't want too much. Ozone helps to moderate that. The molecular mechanism is an oxidative stress sets off a whole series of signaling, and it finally reaches the nucleus, where the nucleus responds. How do you build muscle on yourself? You pump iron. You have to ding that muscle first. It hurts, and then it repairs and it gets stronger. How does a marathon runner go out and do his thing? He's got to stress himself day after day. He just can't go out and do it. This is a Cuban slide. If you precondition animals with ozone ahead of time, you can protect them against infection, liver poisoning with carbon tetrachloride, kidney toxicity, immune problems, and you'll see in another slide just published in the past month in humans, heart. We actually, if you treat a heart attack, and that was one of the contraindications, treat a heart attack, you lower the inflammation and save cells. There it is. Ozone preconditioning will protect against heart attack, injury, and interrupted blood flow and in the liver. What they did was they gave the animals, I said humans before, this was animals now. They gave the animals ozone, ligated an artery, caused a heart attack, and those animals treated with ozone did not have significant injury. Howard says it also stimulates stem cells. Ozone creates stem cells, which is going to go around and repair almost anything. Cuban research. Oh, this one is great. Cuban research shows that ozone, and this is interesting about Cuba. Why couldn't we do this? Shortly after I started doing ozone in 1986, Fidel Castro, of all people, gives $1 million to the Cuban Havana ozone for research. And they did a lot of this basic research. This is in Cuba, a poor country. They found that ozone reduces this enzyme called COX-2, cyclooxygenase 2. It reduces that. It's an anti-inflammatory. Well, so did Vioxx. And Merck knew for years that Vioxx was killing people, yet continued it on the market till 110,000 Americans were killed. To me, that's murder because there was intent. Ozone can knock out COX-2 safely without any toxicity. No need for these toxic, poisonous drugs. So, before we look at additional science, we're going to go to what we called Ebola land and why we did. Information I knew leading me to go there. Why ozone? Mark Seifert told you earlier, viruses have a lipid envelope. True. But they all, not only do they have a lipid envelope susceptible to oxidation, and there's articles out there saying that if you can ding that lipid envelope, you reduce infectivity of the virus. They also have on their surface something called glycoproteins, which are rich in an amino acid called cysteine. Cysteine is a very vulnerable amino acid to oxidation. And I'll show you a little bit more. But here we see Norwalk, polio, and another virus inactivated instantly with ozone. Georgian Medical News, incidence of intravenous ozone on different levels of specificity antibodies. They report that it can eliminate the virus from the blood, and it has a beneficial effect on humoral and cell immunity. That's this balancing that I showed you. Here's the virus. Okay, that's the bad guy. Ebola. And the blue membrane that's continuous is the lipid envelope, and those yellow things that look like popsicles, that's the glycoprotein. That's the fingers that the virus uses to open the cookie jar to get into the cell. It needs those intact thiol groups, SH groups, to get into the cell. The lipid envelope needs to be intact. Drugs don't work because they're unacceptably toxic. There's the thiol groups, SH groups. So if here are my fingers to open the cookie jar, ozone oxidizes those thiol groups to disulfide. Instead of SH, it's SS. And now the fingers are chopped off. The virus cannot get into the cookie jar. And there's the reaction. SH plus SH, that's the thiol group. That's what opens the cookie jar. Plus oxygen, active oxygen, creates SS, a disulfide, in water. The virus is inactivated instantly. Ozone is so hot, it reacts in the blood instantly, but it creates all of those ozonides, and they're longer acting. And they are reactive oxygen species and lipid oxidation products, and they hang around a long time for signaling, but they're oxidants in their own right. Now, having read that the Ebola virus is rich in those thiol groups, I knew that we had something that could take care of that, and that's why I so very much wanted to go. But I didn't expect what happened. Well, you also need to know some more background that I knew as an oxidation physician. We had the great Spanish influenza outbreak, and that's a misnomer. It was not Spanish, but 1918, one of the greatest pandemics ever in the world. It killed millions of people, and if you got influenza pneumonia, you probably had a death sentence. An article was published in The Lancet in February of 1920 where a British physician, Oliver, in India, used a couple pennies worth of hydrogen peroxide intravenously and cut the death rate in half. Viral pneumonia. We can't do that today. Why don't our infectious disease specialists know about this? There's the article. Influenza pneumonia and the intravenous injection of hydrogen peroxide out of The Lancet. Major medical journal even then. What about bacteria? Ozone at very low levels inactivate bacteria virtually instantly. Yes, next. You can see here a quick kill in 1 second. 3 logs, 3 magnitudes of death in a second to bacteria. Ozone hits the membrane and it's like a cannon to the membrane of the bacteria. It blows a hole in it and the bacteria hemorrhages. It's an instant kill. It would be like shooting an animal through the heart. In nature kills bacteria in the air by sunlight, ultraviolet. It works the same way. And if it didn't, we wouldn't be here. And bacteria have had 4 billion years to get resistant to this, and it hasn't. Or we wouldn't be here. Compared to bleach, bleach takes a couple minutes to do the same thing that ozone does in a microsecond. Trump mentioned bleach in 2020. Boy, he was so close to the truth, but he needed a little bit of explanation, sadly. I tried my best to get the information to him through 2 different mechanisms, and it never got to the right place. But he was on point. Dr. Robbins did as well. We both tried. It would have changed history if he really had understood it. Why does ozone kill bacteria but not our own cells? We are aerobic. We are built to burn and metabolize oxygen. So we have the enzymes necessary to protect ourselves from problems that go awry with oxygen. And for the record, most of you, even the doctors, don't know this. When oxygen gets burned in the mitochondria, it first transforms to a radical called superoxide, which then gets reduced to hydrogen peroxide. 12% of the oxygen we burn gets converted to this free radical superoxide, 12 grams a day. That's a lot. We're made for this. The organisms are not. Our cells generate these, as I mentioned before. It generates all kinds of reactive oxygen species and ozone. Ozone affects infection. It floods the bloodstream with oxidants, kills pathogens outright. It modulates the immune system. It causes your red cells to become what Bocci, my mentor, calls super gifted, meaning they can dump their oxygen in the tissues. What good is your red cell if it doesn't release its oxygen? What good is a train if it doesn't unload its cargo at the station? The bottom line in all healing is oxygen, oxygen, oxygen. What I want to know here is why it took some stupid clinician like me to put this together, and all these NIH and FDA scientists and research couldn't look at what I just presented to you and figure this out. It had to be the dumb clucks like us. TNF alpha, I mentioned that to you before and I showed you the slide. Ozone just squashes the production of TNF alpha. Why is that important? Into the eye of the cytokine storm. This is a concept now that's evolving, and we now know that in really hot infections and hot conditions, cytokines are made which are really reactive. And if inflammatory cytokines are made, now you get the immune system coming out and firing a machine gun at everything, including our own cells. That's what's called a cytokine storm. You don't want this TNF alpha and these hot molecules out there because you're going to get nailed too. And that's one of the reasons why we see rheumatoid arthritis and other inflammatory diseases, is because of the overproduction of inflammatory cytokines. Ozone inactivates pathogens on contact, modulates the immune system, and promotes circulation. So I thought it would be the ideal treatment. Sierra Leone. This says, realizing the potential of my life's work, I thought this would be a great opportunity to do humanity a service and get ozone out there where it belongs. And you see I'm wearing this Maha hat, Make America Healthy Again. I love and respect Robert Kennedy. This is slightly off. America was never healthy. I want to make America healthy, so it's making America healthy. The threefold mission was to teach medical personnel there. Well, I wanted to save lives there, but at the same time, if we could save lives there, ozone gets on the map, not only for Ebola, but for just about everything. And then we also have a means of protecting our homeland. And we had our own Ebola of sorts, COVID, and believe me, I think things worse are coming. So you can see this picture. Now imagine if Ebola was here. Do you think we would see crowds on the street like that with a deadly disease? On contact, you touch somebody and you can get it? Oh my God, what they did to us. I live in California. I went hiking on the beach. They had people 10 miles out on trails on the beach wearing masks. They kicked people off the beach. They fined them. They wanted to imprison them on the beach, outdoors. But this is Sierra Leone in the midst of the epidemic. Next, signs everywhere. Ebola. The guy here, I'm at the Ebola Treatment Center teaching how to do Howard's method of DIV. By the way, I did DIV even before he knew about it. I did it in 1986. I just didn't continue much with it because it can be hard on veins.
The guy that's giving the injection came in the next day and he was sweating. And they said, can you give him some therapy? He had Ebola.
That was the guy.
And we didn't know.
That was the guy. This guy on the left, 3 weeks later, I was called that one of our doctors pricked himself with a finger 36 hours ago. He's already got a fever. What do we do? I said, we gave you the protocol. That guy lived. Another one who refused died. Another one begged the government. Another one, the government knew he had a fever, and they wouldn't let him get ozone. And he begged as they carried him away in a paddy wagon, and he died a horrible death. This is Howard and me just after we visited President Koroma, his office. We could not take a picture of him, but that's us leaving the office, and that's a picture of Koroma and Obama together. This is our article, Rapid Resolution of Hemorrhagic Fever, Ebola in Sierra Leone with Ozone Therapy. It has never been repeated. No one has done what this did. The epidemic was a 60% death rate. That means you had a 0.4 chance of survival. 5 times 0.4 to the 5th power is about 1%. The chances of that happening by chance were about 1%. It's statistically significant. It's even more significant because none of them had post-Ebola sequela. And in fact, one of the doctors who was a military captain, he told me afterwards, they said you couldn't have had Ebola, you'd have been dead. In any event, this is a handwritten letter that's a gift from God. It came to me after we had published the article, and it's very difficult to get anything in and out of Sierra Leone. But if you see where that arrow is on the right side, in her own handwriting, she's thanking God for Ebola. She was the consort of their big doctor who died, and she bolted over a razor wire fence to get to us because the military guards wouldn't let her out. She thanks God for ozone there, and in the bottom, she says, I lost half of my life, meaning her guy. But she thanked God that she was still alive. I'm so grateful that I was able to dig that up about 10 years after the fact. This should have made world headlines. Not for me, for the fact that Ebola could potentially be conquered. This was just a pilot report. It was only 5 people. But my God, in an epidemic like this, if you could reduce mortality from 60% to 20%, you're doing good. Well, guess what happened? This form of ozone, Dr. Robbins' DIV, they wouldn't let it. But that doctor who survived started carrying in bags of ozone gas to give to the patients rectally and ozonized water, and their death rate mysteriously dropped from 60% to 25%. No one knew why, but I found that out afterwards. Howard Robbins and I published this, COVID-19, this was our disease, a possible penny costing cure for COVID. Howard says a week before it was announced as a pandemic, we published this, proposing this as a treatment. Now, why is it penny costing? How much does a butterfly needle cost? 25 cents. How much does a syringe cost? 50 cents. How much does the ozone cost once you have a machine? Less than a penny. So this is really a penny treatment. So you haven't heard of this. Why? Here are my questions. Who or what corrupt, malevolent entity is controlling government? The disease maintenance system, not health system, the disease maintenance system, and the press. Did the COVID debacle not make evil apparent? I'm calling it evil. Despite thousands of articles on ozone being effective and safe. In fact, if there is an injury from ozone, it could be reported in the medical literature. It's that rare. The government, and there's thousands in the NIH PubMed library. Next, what does our government say? Go back. Ozone is a toxic gas with no known useful medical application in specific adjunctive or preventive therapy. 21 CFR section 801.415. That's on the books today. This is despite thousands of articles. And by the way, I did communicate directly with RFK Jr. about this. And he told me just before the election, wait till we get in. If we get in, I'll take care of it. So far, it hasn't been done. Ozone is toxic if you breathe it in. It's hard on the lungs. But either I showed it to you before or I will show it to you. You can give ozone any way to the body there is, any imaginable way but one. You can't take it into your lungs. So if you take it into your lungs, yes, it's toxic. Well, if you inhale liquid water into your lungs, it's toxic. You're dead instantly. It's called drowning. Explanation for the rapid effects. We talked about circulation, the immune system, antiviral. So this led me. Now, what shocked both of us is the rapidity of the healing in these patients. Ebola goes like this. You get it, and you're asymptomatic, and then you start getting some symptoms, and you're going down. And once you start getting some symptoms, bang, you collapse. And there's your 60% mortality rate. We got to these people just before the collapse, thank God. And they all made it. So what is going on? Well, there's the Achilles heel. We believe that the virus, Ebola particularly, maybe others, has a very sensitive range of what's called redox. You all know what acid-base balance is, correct? Acid-base balance. There's the presence of hydrogen ions or hydroxyl. And our blood pH has to be in a range of 7.4. If it goes slightly above or slightly below, you'll be sick, and you'll know it. The Ebola, I believe, has a range of reduction oxygen. And if we oxidize the system and pull that hydrogen off of the thiol groups, the virus can't open the cookie jar. It's its Achilles heel. Direct intravenous oxygen gas, or ozone. That's Howard's prime method. I started doing this in 1986. It is controversial, even in our circles. Well, I'll show you some articles. This is references to IV gas. Published in 2004, if you give IV oxygen, just oxygen, and this has been done in Europe for decades, you modulate the immune system. I'll be honest with you. I don't know if half of what he gets with DIV, direct intravenous gas, is oxygen or ozone or both. Frankly, I don't care. I just know that it works and it modulates the immune system. In fact, this article says that intravenous oxygen gas pushes up eosinophils, which typically are related to allergic conditions. And we have found that after DIV, his and my hyperbaric ozone method, eosinophils shoot way up. They then produce an enzyme called 15-LOX1, 15-lipoxygenase 1, which is highly anti-inflammatory and anti-cancer. And I just listened to a patient this morning before we came here, an amazing story, stage 4 cancer, spread to his lungs. He got DIV oxygen. His eosinophils went way up, and he doesn't have a trace of oxygen today. Oxygen gas, it only costs a few pennies. Now, this is what's interesting. It increases antioxidant enzymes, anti-inflammatory pathways. It increases anti-atherosclerosis enzymes. And most important, it increases the most important vascular lubricator, which is called prostacyclin. And we'll show you that in a moment. It improves diuresis, getting rid of swelling. And a guy named Regelsberger published that it works as well as hyperbaric oxygen, yet costs a fraction. And then there's ultraviolet blood irradiation. Ultraviolet blood irradiation was developed by a man named Emmett Knott in the 1930s. There were no antibiotics at that time. The first case was on a septic woman. She was septic because of an illegal abortion. She lived and went on and had children in those days. This is an article here that was published in the American Journal of Surgery in 1947, detailing all kinds of infections, peritonitis, sepsis, infections in bone. And this is before the age of antibiotics, or just at the dawn of it. If you got them early, 100% of them were fixed. No antibiotics. Just taking some blood out, exposing the blood to ultraviolet light, and giving it back. If they were moderately advanced, 98% recovery. And if they were dying on death's door, almost half of them lived. Why don't our ivory tower experts know about this? Why don't these people around here know about this? Why are people dying? This was published. An infectious disease specialist should know about this. In fact, I was asked to go to a Texas hospital to attend a commercial airline pilot, a father and a husband, who was dying of a superbug. I said, I'll go on my dime. So I got on the phone with the hospitalist, and she said, well, is this thing FDA approved? I said, no, but I got lots of articles for you, scores of them. She said, well, I'll talk to the staff. She called me back 4 hours later, said, nope, we're not going to do it. And the poor man died in front of his family a half a day later. This is American medicine. Let him die. That's my wife about 15 years ago when we first got one of the last remaining knot machines on the planet. And it still works, and it still does these things. Ozone therapy, collective research across a couple oceans between two researchers and me. Sylvia Menendez, Velio Bacci, and me. Those are books. Ozone, a New Medical Drug, that's Bacci's book, and Ozone Therapy is Menendez's book. These compilate all of their peer-reviewed scientific publications, and you'll see a couple of mine. This is the animal models, again, where they were preconditioned with ozone, and they were saved from destruction by pre-use of ozone, and in 2025 now heart. Speaking of pre-treatment, since day one of my use of ozone in 1986, I've prepped any patient going to surgery or needing chemo or radiation. I've had hundreds of these. None of my surgical patients ended up with a wound dehiscence, infection, or a bad outcome. Not one. And any patient going on to chemo and radiation, the doctors ask the patient, I don't know how you're doing this, but you're not dying of my treatment. They don't have the serious complications that naked chemo and radiation get. Howard finds the same thing. Medical ozone can be given all these ways. As I mentioned, any which way. Women can take it in their vagina. You can take it rectally. You can shoot it in the sinuses as long as you don't breathe it in the lungs. I've even given it intrathecally into the cerebrospinal fluid. That was done by a pediatrician in the 1970s to treat and cure meningitis in children. For the scientists here, that's the oxyhemoglobin curve. If it moves to the right, you're dumping more oxygen into the tissue, and that there's a magic molecule called 2,3-DGP. When I was in medical school in 1975, the ICU specialist said if only we could increase 2,3-DGP to get more oxygen. Ozone does this. Ozone also modulates nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is critical for vasodilation. In a series of articles, both Bacci and Menendez have shown that ozone therapy has profound modulation of cytokines, TGF-beta, which is a beneficial cytokine, TNF-alpha, it stimulates something called gamma interferon, and it probably in the last lecture we heard something very interesting about interferons. I have no doubt that ozone acts as creates messenger molecules to do exactly that. Summary revitalization effects by Bacci. I've gone through all of this with you. At the bottom it says induction of synthesis of potent cytokines and interferon, which modulates the immune system. This is Cuba. Sylvia gave me this slide about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. They had already done 2 million people in Cuba, a poor country. And ozone was cheap to do there. All you needed was oxygen and a machine. They couldn't afford our expensive $200 a pill drugs. No side effects. This is my case, published case. This is a man named Tim. He told me to go on YouTube. He stimulated me to start putting my cases on YouTube in 2011. We cured him of Lyme disease, and I'm going to use the word cure because it never came back. We'll use a permanent remission. Let's use that. So he comes back to me a few years later in 2015 with another tick bite, and he's got cellulitis. And I said, hey, you've got active infection here. I've got to give you an antibiotic for medical legal reasons. And he used the F word and says, F you, Rowen. No way. You cured me of Lyme. I'm not taking an antibiotic for this. So he didn't take the prescription that I forced him to walk out with, a written prescription. He didn't fill it. 3 days later, he walks back and the infection's gone. I also reported the first ever treatment of a septic prosthetic joint. I injected the doctors, it was culture negative because it was a biofilm. I shot ozone into it, and she ended up getting oral antibiotics, amoxicillin, and ozone therapy, and ozone into the hip. And this has never been reported before. If you get a septic prosthetic hip, you need surgery or intravenous antibiotics. She didn't. She recovered from this. Incidentally, she had an oral organism in her joint. I told her on her visit to me, you have an infected root canal. I do kinesiology, muscle testing. I told her which tooth it was. Sure enough, she went to a dentist, it was infected, and she ended up with an oral organism that probably seeded her joint from an infected root canal. And in my clinic, we always check for teeth because hidden infections in the jaw will overcome ozone treatment. You have to take care of occult dental infections. Here's a good example. This guy, he's a field hand. He has dermatomyositis, a really hot case, and probably with 50% mortality. He's on 4 anti-inflammatory drugs: prednisone, 120 milligrams, azathioprine, Plaquenil. They're all. And his CK enzyme is 9,000 when it shouldn't be any higher than about 4 to 450. He looked like death. I found on him with muscle testing, I said, hey, Daniel, you've got 4 teeth. I think they're infected. Get him taken care of. I treated him with ozone so he could do his work. And he delayed and delayed getting the dental work, and I beat him over the head with a wet balloon. I told him I'd even pay for it. Finally, he did get it done. They found infection in every tooth, I told him. And in just a couple months, I was able to taper his prednisone from like 90 to 120 milligrams to 0. And that's what he looked like a year and a half later after everything was done. And he got direct IV ozone, Howard's method. A lovely patient of ours with rheumatoid arthritis. She received, when she came to us, she was on lots of drugs. Next slide. On the left, her hands beforehand. On the right, her hands after she's off of drugs and getting oxidation therapy. The yellow is superoxide dismutase, one of the most important enzymes in our body. I told you that 12% of the oxygen gets converted to SOD, so we need that to superoxide. So we need that enzyme to get rid of that particular free radical. Ozone therapy raises superoxide, but it gets more interesting than that. Could ozone therapy be a fountain of youth? It turns out that higher levels of SOD activate the enzyme telomerase. The telomere is the end cap of DNA. As our DNA divides, the end cap, it's like a shoelace. If you take the end cap off, it unravels. Well, the end cap of DNA protects the DNA. SOD protects that end cap through the enzyme telomerase. So when I read that, I said, I'm doing ozone on a regular basis. Ozone in cancer. Getting more oxygen might help cancer. This patient came to me in 2009, death's door, colon cancer, apple core lesion, two 10-centimeter lesions in his liver. 5 months later, ozone and nutritional supplements, his enzymes were normal. He said, I don't have cancer, I don't have cancer. You do, you got an apple core lesion. It was like working like hard to get him to come back in. But finally, after his liver enzymes went away with just ozone nutritional supplements, his liver mets went away. I said, get the primary taken out. He did. He got it out surgically, and there he is in 2016. I saw him in 2009. This is 2025. The man's still alive. No trace of cancer. Those were his therapies. Surgery, after the fact, ozone and nutrition. Intra-arterial, you can give ozone in the artery. Next, these are wounds before, on top, after giving ozone therapy. The next slide is my case. This guy was a health practitioner who believed in anti-aging. He shot his arm up. He wanted to get rid of sagging skin here. So he shot in rooster comb hyaluronic acid to get rid of the sagging skin, and some of it got into his brachial artery and went down to his hand, and I thought he was going to lose his hand. We did a lot of different things. I think he even got hyperbaric oxygen. I had it at the time, but the key was intraradial artery ozone. I shot ozone in its radial artery. You see the hand. Severe congestive heart failure. This man saw us with an ejection fraction of 25%, barely compatible with life. I think he got like 8 treatments of what we call hyperbaric ozone. That's not his method. The hyperbaric ozone may work faster than DIV, and he uses it. And you'd have to see us spar with each other over his DIV and my hyperbaric. Anyway, he went back to his cardiologist, 57% ejection fraction. The cardiologist just absolutely couldn't believe it. Ozone appears to activate stem cells, and it also activates a pathway called NRF2, nuclear erythroid factor 2. That is a key enzyme pathway that stimulates the DNA to make all these antioxidant enzymes and modulate the immune system. Ozone is a key stimulator of that pathway. It's one reason why I take ozone regularly. You know, I said a marathon runner has to be in condition to run a race. You just don't go out and run the race. So I condition myself. Platelet aggregation. There's a lot of drugs out there to allegedly thin the blood and reduce platelet aggregation. Ozone reduces platelet aggregation. You can see it, the blue on compared to the pink. The pink is without ozone, the blue is with ozone. Why give a drug? Ozone does it. Prostacyclin is the most important vascular lubricator. It helps with blood vessel tone. It's anti-cancer, anti-clotting, anti-inflammatory, and anti-mitogenic. That's prostacyclin. You get prostacyclin from Brian Peskin's Parent Essential Oils. What does ozone do? See the black. Ozone increases prostacyclin. Very difficult thing to do. Tuberculosis resistance in a crisis. This is an article that shows that if you add ozone to standard antibiotic therapy, you reduce antibiotic resistance in TB. But it's not used. In 1903, and kept in the Library of Congress, and a book was published on ozonated glycerin. Somehow they had the fortitude. They had brains in those days with medicine. We don't today. After Tesla made the first commercial ozone generator, they were doing ozone treatments in this country. Since the 1890s, they were ozonating glycerin. They were nebulizing it for inhalation, rubbing it on skin and swallowing it, curing all kinds of diseases. This book was published in 1903, and it's kept as a national treasure. This woman came to us several months ago with Mycobacterium abscessus in her lungs, far worse than tuberculosis, untreatable by conventional medicine. I gave her ozonated glycerin to nebulize, and she's basically all better now. It took her about 3 weeks, and she was 80% better. A few more months, close to 100%. This is shingles on the left, before, after ozone on the right, Cuban slide, and that's psoriasis on the bottom. My observations and Dr. Robbins' observations on ozone and shingles is nothing short of miraculous. I've had no cases of postherpetic neuralgia. It's safe in pregnancy, improves placental function. Next. The Cubans say that it actually may help stimulate T beta cells in the pancreas. Autism, we've treated several. Next. Senile dementia, it improves all aspects of cognitive function according to the Cubans. Next. Lumbar disc, high efficacy in lumbar disc disease. It should be a first-line treatment. And I just did him. A report in San Francisco, American College of Rheumatology, osteoarthritis. Outstanding treatment, especially for knees. 76-year-old male, that's pre-ozone. Next, and that's joint growth, cartilage growth in the joint, articular cartilage, very important. Next, this is courtesy of Dr. Dennis Harper. Complex regional pain, we put that out for chronic pain, direct IV ozone. Cuban series of reports showing that ozone is safe. And even if you give it rectally over and over again, no damage to the rectal tissue. Next. What is the reason why ozone is not mainstream all over the country? One word. You can't patent it for profit. That's why. Why would drug companies give you something that cures a disease when they can hook you on a chemical for the rest of your life? Follow the money trail. How do you beat a better product than your own? You buy off politicians for a monopoly. I published this, Unholy Interlocking of Government, Corporate and Medical Dogma Sacrifices Lives, Ignaz Semmelweis Resurrected. It's your life and the life of your family. Please consider all of the foregoing in the light of the nation's current epidemics and what I've just presented to you. If pharma had a patentable potion that did just 10% of what ozone did, it would be plastered over every billboard and TV advertisement, and if it was safe, everybody in the universe would be using it. Mr. Kennedy, please keep your promise and get rid of that blatantly false regulation. Thank you for the honor of your presence. That's my contact information. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for having us, Diana.